Thank you both so much for taking the time to talk to me. I'm so happy for you guys. Congratulations for being on the short list because
Thank you.
I've seen this movie like 4 times.
Oh,
I saw it at like Holly Shorts, Outfest, New Fest. Um, it is such an unbelievably generous movie. And it's something that is really, I think it's because, I mean, I had a strong connection with my mom. Probably I should have had more, before she passed last year. So it was like
I'm so sorry.
yeah, thank you. It was sort of, there's a feeling every time that I watch this movie, it's towards the end, that I sort of can't really describe what I'm necessarily responding to. But
Mm,
I like that I respond to that um, in that
mm,
way. So long roundabout way for me to say thank you for taking the time to talk to me. Um,
thank you.
so I read that it was Raul's idea to do this as an animated short. Correct me if I'm
Yeah,
wrong.
it was.
Um, I'm just not aware. Like I just don't recognize um, Colman Domingo is in a lot of animated projects that I know of. I could be totally wrong, but I was just curious. Like the first time that I saw it, I was just so thrilled, and I was
Oh,
curious, like adapting something that is your own work, turning it into an animated short. Like, what is the most sort of intimidating and like thrilling thing about that?
wow. That's a great way for what's most intimidating and thrilling. Should I kick it off?
Yes, please. Uh-huh.
I think that when Raul approached me with the idea of
Mhm.
turning this particular story into a piece of animation, I got actually very excited about it
Mhm.
because for a long time I decided not to do the solo show, A Boy and a Soul, which is where it came from. I wrote it and started performing it in 2004, 2005, and I put it away. It was sort of a little timepiece that I did.
Okay.
But then I don't know. I think it was I don't know, many things happening at the time because it really was at the top of the pandemic, and we're in the house and we're trying to think of creative ways to put some good out into the world.
Mhm.
And I'm always in my office, trying to create something, do something. And Raul said, "What if we, what did A Boy and a Soul? What if we did that piece?" And he said he had the idea of animation because
Mhm.
he always said that I wrote in a very imaginative, magical way, and I always
Yeah.
live in that magical realism. And he said it would really thrive in that way, right?
Yeah.
And then I was like, okay, this is what I actually did. I do remember this. I said, if you think so, why don't you take a stab at like how would you open that up? And because I have it in one way, dealing with it as
Mhm.
as a solo performer, but how does the world build out as a
Mm.
writer? And so I
Okay.
said, here, take it. And he took it and came back with a draft. And I was like, oh, that's great. So
Okay.
mom flies to the moon. All these
Mhm.
other things that didn't happen in a solo show, but that's all Raul stuff. He was like, "Oh, this is how you take off with your imagination because with animation you can do anything."
Yeah.
So that became really exciting, and then we went down the road, the scary road of trying to make it, and we didn't know how to make it. We don't know animators. We now we do. Now we're part of the animation community, which we're very proud
Yeah.
of. But because I think we both come from a place of saying I don't know is part of our superhero powers because it leads you to some answers and
Mhm.
you go out there with some innocence and just your heart and saying, here, this is what I'd like to do. Would you like to join me and get in the sandbox and play and create this thing? And I think that's what he did. What do you think?
No, I think that's exactly what Coleman said. It's so interesting to in your mind your progress from the stage performance to a piece that becomes animation because anything is possible. And that way, A Boy and a Soul that Coleman wrote, I feel like we're both so attached to it. I think it's so ingrained in us because also
Mhm.
to us it for the first time when we just started dating in San Francisco
18 years ago.
18 years ago,
Wow.
and it was so beautiful. I remember just taking all of that in, and the medium of theater at the time was very new for me, and so I was just taking everything that Colman was possible, what made possible, and everything that he was capable of, and it was just so beautiful. And I think with animation, once we stepped away from it, it was last time we worked on it was
What so?
Born and
Years ago. I don't know.
but probably
2012,
about 10 years ago. I think with having stepped away from this allowed at least me to see it in a new way. I feel like with animation, there was such a sense of possibility. I think that
Mhm.
was what exciting, because I actually remember that moment when before we started, truly like actually going into the thick of the collaboration with Jeff and Jeremy, our animators and co-directors. They actually, I remember looking of what's available, and the the suspended motion animation and the 3D, and like how they make them out of Play-Doh, and it could be cutout figures. It's just so beautiful, and it can be. They truly were able to create in any style.
And it makes us feel like, honestly, I feel like because of that,
Mhm.
we're both artists in our own right, and it felt like we were playing with something that we didn't know we were going to create. It almost took you back
Yeah,
to that
yeah.
when you're a child again. You're like, I have no idea, but I know the intention is to create. Like you said, it was a generous intention, to be honest, to put something about love and light and imagination and hope
Mhm.
into the world. And so we got in the sandbox with these two other guys, and we're just like, I don't know what we're creating, but I'm going to let my heart lead and give everything
Mhm.
I can creatively. So that's why I feel like between the four of us in particular, and then Raphael, our sound designer, came on later. Between the four of us, you almost can't tell where one began and one ends because it
Mhm.
all overlapped. Raul became the rotoscope director and the acting director, and we just all use whatever we have to create the thing. You know.
I always, when I talk to people that do animation, like I know nothing about animation. So like I love when like the shorts, when and during award season when I get to talk to so many creative people. And I feel like I learn so much every time I talk to somebody. Like I've been doing a bunch of interviews lately, and the way that even just listening to people talk about animation and the different styles and stuff is just so beautifully fascinating to me. So to sort of know that you guys, uh, it kind of reminds me a little bit of like almost like theater school a little bit, when you
Yeah.
have that kind of like, um, there's an eagerness to it that you want to learn, and everyone is so like collaborative. They're like, yeah, let me teach you this, let me teach you that. That's what sort of
Yeah.
sparked in my brain when you guys were saying that.
That's
Um,
exactly it, because you feel like you're about to possibly fail together. You know what I mean? It does feel that way. It feels like theater school. You're like, I'm not sure, but there's a lot of trust exercises, and
mhm,
it's a lot of just pouring into a brain trust of
mm,
what we all
mm,
believe in and putting it all in there and saying, "Hey, go for it." I'm not gonna
mhm,
be over your shoulder. I'm gonna give you everything I have. Now go off and animate that, or you go off and you do the rotoscope with that. Coleman, you go off
mm.
and you. I even worked on the vocals on my own actually in the studio. That's something that I talked to Raul about it. I'm like, I think it's more like this. I want it to be more intimate than it was in performance. And so,
Mm.
we just did what we needed to do to make it happen.
Yeah, okay. Um, I did want to ask about the decision. I love that the set of the film looks like a set that I would see, like I would like walk into like, I don't know, a regional theater space to see something. Is that something that you guys wanted to keep in there to sort of honor the original performance? Just because I love how we get to sort of see like the backstage area and sort of get to see everything from like a 360 point of view. So I was wondering if you could tell me about that, showing that.
I was almost unsure of it because that was something that Jeremy and Jeff they proposed to us to keep the
Okay.
origins of the theater. I
Mm,
think that from my money, it was like, oh, the kid, he's upstairs, outside his mom, it'll be animated like that. And they were like, the roots of the storytelling of me being the storyteller. That's why I'm even credited as being the storyteller,
mhm,
because the story lives in me. And so I love that amalgamation of all these different um, uh, uh, performance, memory, stagecraft, film, animation. It's layers upon layers upon layers upon layers upon layers, which I think is interesting, right?
Yeah. It's, actually, what Jeff and Jeremy did, which was beautiful when they came back to us with the idea that like, we think that the theatrical performance, live theater performance, is actually intrinsically ingrained in this piece. So they said that it would not work without it, and we were actually, that's an interesting thing, because I feel like what Jeff and Jeremy did, they actually bridged us, because Colman was so attached and so in it as a performer, and I feel like I was understanding it as a viewer. So and I feel like I always enjoyed it as a viewer as well. And I feel like what they did, both of them, they came in and they were able to give it to us in such a way where completely outside of ourselves, and allowed us to look at the work and look at ourselves in a way, with a very clear view, right?
They had a very, very, I love that, the string and or even all the little details, like, or even like the audience. Yeah, right. All those little details right there helps you suspend your belief and let you know that it's always a story that I'm telling. I'm always telling you a story. We're not trying to pull the wool over your eyes. So when mom starts flying to the moon, we know she's being pulled by a string. We know that the origins is from a storyteller telling the story. I even love the fact that for those who we love and care about so deeply and who've been a part of the journey, they're actually in the film. That opening shot is actually many loved ones. There's a 8-year-old version of myself in the audience. There is my sister, my brother. We have all these different friends and loved ones. There's my managers in it. There's and also the person coming in late.
I was like, who is the person who's late? I need to know who that is.
Do you know who it is?
No, tell me.
He's sitting right next to me.
The funny thing was, I showed it to my husband yesterday. I was going through some short films, and he was like, show me the movie that you're going to do the interview with tomorrow. And I like plugged in my laptop. We were watching it on the TV, and I had already seen it a couple of times by that point. I was getting a drink, and I was literally coming back to the couch as that person was coming into the theater, and he was like, you guys are late. You're all late. You're late. The man on the screen is late. He's like, sit down.
That's wonderful. And there is something very when I matched yesterday.
Oh my God, I love that. I love that so much. This may sound like a dumb question, but I couldn't find anything on it, and I wasn't sure. Colman, do you do the voices of everybody?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's funny because people never, they don't get that at first. I'm like, no, that's me playing my mother.
I could, the funny thing is about it is I could maybe, because the thing is, as a performer, I love your speaking voice. I love when, for some reason, I say it about very specific people. It's like, I love Annette Benning's speaking voice. I love your speaking voice, how you can like modulate it and play with it. And I could hear it at the beginning, but then I feel like every time that I watch it, I lose you in it, and I forget. I have to remind myself, before I really understood, I was like, that's Colman Domingo. And I feel like I know your voice so much because I've seen you in so many things, but I wanted to know, like, does that put pressure on you? Like how, like if I was tasked with impersonating my mother, she would have killed me, because I don't think that I would have been able to do any of it justice. But I was so impressed every time that I had to kind of like bring myself back to it, because every time I watched, I was like, storyteller, he's the only person who's credited. I like went on IMDb, I was like, he's the only person who's there.
Yeah, and I was, it's not Regina King playing that role. It's
like, I want to know, like, because I personally love speaking to performers about voice and how the voice lives in your body. Like, how does that, I guess, how do you do that, and how does that feel to like live inside you, kind of?
Well, first of all, that's a great question. One is the greatest compliment that I've ever received about A Boy and a Soul and New Moon is from my siblings, who say I sound just like my mother when I play her.
God, that's
which is beautiful. Like, I lost my mother in 2006, and she was my best friend. I loved her so very much. And before, when I just had to play a boy and a soul, and I play like 12 different characters in it, sometimes five at one time in one scene. People have always been very in the theater. My theater following knows that that's actually what I did a lot of. I've always, which is why I wrote a show like that, where I can do that. Where I can pitch my voice very high, very low, in between, and shapeshift as a character actor.
Yeah.
All of the shows I've done on Broadway, I've done Scottsboro Boys, where I played many different characters, or Passing Strange, that people can still watch now on Amazon Prime. Passing Strange, where I played closet choir director, or a German performance artist, and a Dutch nudist in one show. And I pitched my voice in very different places. So that's actually where my voice truly lives. I've always been a character actor in that way. And even if people actually go back to the body of my work in film or television, they will actually be able to see that I pitch my voice very differently for every role. It may have a bit more resonance, here, lower, middle, head, you name it. But I think there'll be a great example when people see this year, when they see Color Purple and Rustin. My voice can't be even more different, because Rustin had a pitchier voice that was placed a bit higher, because that's naturally the way he spoke. And then my Mister, I have a journey for him over 40 years, where I started young Mister, and I go to this more gravelly, like with life and experience and becoming a bit more bitter with the world. He goes into his lower register a bit more, and it has more weight and size to it. So that's something that I think now it's funny. It's part of my wheelhouse that I love to do, because that's the way I've come into my work, is making very fine decisions on every single thing. The way I move my hands, the way I move my body, what's my sign, how do I eat, how do I sit, how do I move my mouth. But now I think people will be able to digest and be able to see that now, that, oh, that's actually something that I do. That's actually part of my wheelhouse.
And that's actually a really great question, because when we were shooting the rotoscopy, when Colman, it was very wonderful to see how much of the plate was in him. So when I was shooting footage of Colman as your mom, you actually could see how the physicality changes, immediately when he goes into his mom's voice, and he sort of positions his body differently, and the way he carries his body. It was all on the footage. And so the guys, the way when they animated it, I think it was also, they were so happy with it, seeing how much of the character was already there. So it was not really, I think, a lot to sort of invent, because it was already there.
Because even because I think with the solo show, we would always do things like I would attach a gesture to my mother, a physical gesture. Even when you see her like wiping her sweat in the beginning and under her bosom, and just when she would be a bit more softer. My mother always spoke a bit more from here. She was always a bit more. It was always a gentle way of speaking, which is that's the way I always hear her in my ear. And my dad was a bit more rough and big and took up a lot of space in the house. So anyway, that's just where I find my voice. Yeah.
Let's do it. Let's do the whole interview about voice and speech. Let's do it. Let's
do it, Joey.
Let's
oh
do
my
it.
God.
Oh my God.
You see, I'm nerding out on this, so that's great.
Well, because I even thought, when I watched it the last time, I thought physicality of like voice versus something like, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. And I was thinking, just thinking about the decisions that you would have to make of how often you're playing on stage, the amount, how tired you guys are from traveling as that type of performer versus something like your mother, because you bring such it's like you're it's just like a wide warmth that the voice is, that sort of like whoosh, like sort of waves over all of us. It's this beautiful like tidal wave of warmth that I can think of when you speak as her. I want to speak a little bit about imagery, if I could, just because I feel like the last couple seconds of the film is, oh God, it's just so breathtaking. And I just love how it's blue throughout the whole thing. I love how there's the burst of green from the plants. Like that image of your mom sort of swirling around with like the crescent of the moon to show like her pregnant belly. I just sort of got chills just thinking about it. I was curious if you could tell me, um, since you're expanding it from a stage play to something that is animated and you have, you can do whatever you want with it. What sort of imagery was important to you both?
Well, I think, because I think just out of the necessity,
Mhm.
due to Jeff and Jeremy being French, they're from France, from Lyon,
Mhm.
France. So they actually are not American at all. I think I don't think they visited before, maybe a couple of times, but never lived in the States. And so what was important for Coleman and I is to make sure that the spatial temporal references were there. And because it was just so specific, because it was Philadelphia, 1970s.
A Black woman with the head wrap on her head. So all the details of color, of clothing, and we would ask each other, they would send us a list. Well, what kind of clothing did she wear, and images, and Raul and I would find images and pour into the Dropbox,
Mm.
and any little thing that we had of backyards in Philadelphia, of row homes, of the kind of plants. I told Raul specifically we used to have morning glories blooming in the morning in our backyard. So Raul would make sure we give references to that.
Mm.
And so
Okay.
so every single image was so important to us. And it's funny, we did have another image and we wrestled with it. The one where they put, by the time my mother floated to the moon, my mother, was she Aretha Franklin in the moon? And suddenly she was, what was that? And then we cut it.
We actually were debating, like, in terms of
We had a
how
cut of it at one point.
we had like where the moon actually becomes Aretha.
Mm.
So there was a little bit of that, but I think at the end, I think it was just sort of going
It
into
went too far, and they went. That's the thing. I love that they distilled it, and they were like, only what we need. So for us, it was like the idea of her floating up and hanging in the sky, listening, and then floating down to her son. By her reaching,
Mm.
because before it was Aretha up there singing with a head wrap,
Yeah.
like a gown, and the moon. It was truly wonderful, and I loved it. But I love that we never, between Raul and our animators Jeff and Jeremy, they did what Chanel would say. They would, before you go out, take off one thing. So they knew how to edit and just make sure that we were committed to what do we need to tell the story, and that's it.
I think the excitement of what's possible in animation is
Mm.
so easy to give yourself to, but I think at the end the story and making sure the story and the nomenclature, the way that we were going, the direction, it was all kind of, we're abiding by the central line, and I think that was important to us. So
Yeah.
that kind
Yeah.
of went away.
So less noise, and continue
Mm.
to make sure that we're telling the story and being thoughtful and intentional with every little moment, even the moment of the breath at the end. For me, that's
Mhm.
one of my favorite images,
Yeah.
because I actually didn't understand it when they wanted. They're like, could you take an inhale and exhale? And then Raul will go with me. I feel like I was so annoying that day. I was just like, what? I'm gonna breathe and just bow. I don't know what.
Very exaggerated breaths.
And I was, and Raul said, no, more. I was like, what? And so I get annoying sometimes when I'm being directed. To be very honest, I know I do, because I was like, what? What are you talking about? And so, but then I understood that we needed that breath after the storytelling, because the breath is also, I think it's a generous breath and it's a
Mhm.
shared breath. So the breath is for you as well.
Mm.
It's a collective breath.
Yeah, I always think there's something when I was in school, like when I was doing I don't remember what class it was. It was probably just like an acting class, but I remember we did like these random little things, teaching about like what everything in the theater means. And I remember that something that always stuck with me, that anytime I see something on stage, I'm reminded of it when the at the end of a show, when the audience is applauding, and they're saying thank you to the performers, the bows don't really mean just like, oh, that's great. It really means like you're welcome to the audience, sort of, or also thank you for being here. And I feel like that's what
Yeah.
that breath reminded me of when
Hmm.
I saw it.
Hmm. Yeah.
I have to say a line that I really love from it, and I'm gonna butcher it. It's something about the butterscotches, something about saying whispering at the
With the
on the
butterscotch candy whispering at the bottom,
I love that.
and peppermint, but with the butterscotch and peppermint candy whispering at the bottom.
I love that line so much.
Oh, thank you, Joey. This was so good. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I really feel a lot of intention with this, and it feels like there is nothing extraneous with this film. Um, there was nothing frivolous with it. It is so heartfelt, and it is so warm. I keep saying warm, but there is such a warmth to this film that, and there's, oh God, it feels so genuine. There's nothing cliche about it. Every time I watch it, and I know what's coming, visually and from the text and the performance, I just absolutely love it. I am really rooting for you guys to get nominated. So forgive me for just, you know, gushing at you for 20 minutes.
I appreciate it. I will not forgive you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Good. And I have to say before I let you go, I really wish that North Star was shortlisted. That is a beautiful,
Me too.
beautiful,
Thank you.
tender story. So just had to say
Thank
that.
you.
But really rooting for you guys. Thank you so much for your time. And
Thank you, Joey.
have a good rest of your day.
I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.